The blood-stained front page lay across her lifeless body, its headline matching her fate with chilling precision. Young woman found murdered in South St. Louis. Ink smeared her mouth, torn newsprint lodged in her nails, as if she clawed the story that predicted her own death that night, cold, alone. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the channel. She was 22-year-old journalism student Marla Jennings, last seen leaving the University of Missouri, St. Louis Library just after 9:20 p.m. on November 3, 1975. A determined academic with a quiet yet relentless curiosity, she had been researching a series of unsolved disappearances tied to local corruption, something no one thought much of at the time, something the city's newspapers barely touched except in brief, clipped police updates. She was found the following morning in an abandoned printing warehouse on Gratiot Street, her body surrounded by rolls of outdated newsprint and stacks of discarded editions. Police would later note that the building still smelled of ink, metal, and dust, a stale perfume of halted information. Investigators quickly identified the most bizarre detail. The front page covering her body was stamped with the next day's date. The issue had not yet been printed publicly, not yet sent to presses, not yet circulated. Yet it lay on her cold chest like a signature of whoever had taken her life. St. Louis homicide detectives faced immediate pressure. The year had already seen a steep increase in violent crime, and the Jennings case, young, attractive, promising, tied to university reporting, ignited a media blaze. Her parents, a postal worker and a part-time seamstress, fronted every camera with trembling composure. They feared, even in early interviews, that Marla had dug into something too heavy, too political, too dangerous. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the skull and subtle ligature marks on the wrists. There were no signs of sexual assault, but the precision of the violence suggested calculation rather than rage. Her killer didn't lose control. The killer executed a plan. Toxicology showed mild sedatives in her blood, enough to disorient but not kill. Time of death estimated between 10:50 p.m. and 12:05 a.m. A torn note in her coat pocket proved the first clue. It contained only a typed line clipped from a newspaper. "The truth will be printed. Whether ink or blood must pay for it." This sentence led detectives to examine her coursework, her articles, her drafts. She had been focused on something called municipal fund transfers, a dry name masking a deeper scandal. Misappropriated public money routed through shell print companies, some of which shared addresses with abandoned warehouses, including the one where her body was staged. It took less than a week for police to link the warehouse to 3 defunct newsprint suppliers. One had been investigated for fraud a decade earlier but never charged. Employees interviewed included union press operators, retired editors, delivery drivers who had seen too many night shifts and too many secrets. Many spoke carefully, as if someone still listened. The newspaper that revealed her fate, the St. Louis Herald, became the center of suspicion. Its publisher, Charles Renner, immediately denied involvement. Yet when detectives asked about the pre-publication paper found with her, no clear explanation emerged. That edition was supposedly still on locked layout reels until dawn. Printing supervisors swore no pages had gone out, not even proofs. But the homicide unit found a gap in the log of early press access. Between 1:00 and 3:00 a.m., the warehouse where she was found recorded a service key entry, no signature, no timestamp on exit. Evidence collection was complicated by the cold warehouse conditions. Fingerprints smudged easily on inked surfaces, and fibers collected from the scene were so saturated with news dust that lab separation dragged on for weeks. Still, one strand stood out, a gray-blue thread, distinct high-quality wool, likely from an expensive overcoat. Detectives considered Renner again, his custom suits and tailored winter coats, but he was hardly the only man in St. Louis wearing imported fabric. Meanwhile, Marla's classmates painted a picture of a quiet but intense researcher. She believed her upcoming exposé could connect missing college bursar funds to counterfeit printing invoices spread across 3 counties. She mentioned strange calls in the night, voices clicking off before she spoke. She had told a professor she felt watched on her route home from the library. By December 1975, the case had reached a national crime column. The combination of youth, intellect, and symbolic murder, killed by the very medium she studied, captured public imagination. Women across campus feared walking after sunset. Journalism students began carrying switchblades and heavy flashlights. The university dean pressed police daily for updates, terrified that one of their own had been silenced for pursuing truth. Yet the investigation stalled. The printing warehouse showed no forced entry. Whoever brought her there had keys or inside authorization. Access records were vague, handwritten, barely legible, typical for 1970s industrial sites. The 2 night shift watchmen on duty claimed no recollection of visitors, though one later adjusted his statement, saying he may have heard a truck door slam around 11:00 p.m., too distant to place. Detectives reconstructed Marla's final hours. She left the library, crossed campus, and was seen on a city bus near West Florissant. She exited downtown. After that, sightings blurred. A bartender remembered a girl matching her description tapping the payphone, frustrated, unable to connect a call. A taxi driver claimed he dropped a young woman near the riverfront but couldn't confirm it was Marla. No camera surveillance existed, only witness memory, unreliable under tension. Within months, leads thinned. The newspaper quietly published updates, small paragraphs buried beneath holiday sales and football standings. Yet the city felt the weight of her unfinished work. Rumors twisted around late-night diners and pressroom corners, that she had found names tying politicians to mob-run printing fronts, that she had typed her final article under fear, that she had trusted someone in the newsroom who betrayed that trust. Spring of 1976 brought a detail almost overlooked. Forensic examiners, analyzing ink transfer on her palms, determined she had touched the newspaper only after death. The placement was staged. Even stranger, the ink composition in that edition was marginally different from standard print. Higher carbon density, unique metallic undertone. A test batch, perhaps, or a specialized formula from a private press run. Detectives returned to Renner. Editions meant for press never used that ink. He blamed suppliers. Suppliers blamed outdated sourcing. When pressed, one former press chemist admitted quietly that specialized ink mixtures were sometimes commissioned for private commemorative test runs, a vague term that cleared nothing. Then came the missing ledger. Financial books from one of the defunct print companies vanished from police evidence in April. The clerk responsible resigned abruptly. Internal affairs chalked it up to procedural misplacement, but detectives privately believed it was theft, an erasure of motive. Marla's parents never recovered from the loss. They stored her notebooks, hundreds of pages of annotated articles and clipped headlines, believing someday they would matter. Detectives promised annual reviews, but over time, her case faded into the stack of unsolved archives, trapped beneath other tragedies, other deadlines. Yet St. Louis never forgot the image. A dead young reporter covered by tomorrow's news, her story printed before her fate sealed ink to flesh. The discovery that the ink on the newspaper was not standard production stock renewed internal suspicion, but publicly the case remained quiet, confined mostly to true crime hobbyists and university archivists who preserved Marla's final articles as if they were proof of something larger. In the years that followed, New detectives rotated into the homicide division, inheriting her file briefly before placing it back into cold storage. But the forensic notes, though catalogued poorly by 1970s standards, retained damning precision. The sedative used on her, the blunt force impact angle, the staged ink placement, the missing financial ledger tied to shuttered print suppliers. All of it formed a story more cohesive than anyone admitted at the time, a narrative of calculated silencing, not an act of random violence. By 1981, St. Louis faced newspaper layoffs, union strikes, and a shrinking print economy. Most of the companies Marla had investigated were gone completely, their warehouses sold, gutted, repurposed into storage sites or left to decay. The Gratiot Street building where she was found burned in a suspicious electrical fire. Investigators noted accelerant traces, but insurance records labeled it accidental. With that blaze, physical remnants of the crime scene vanished. The ink barrels, scrap newsprint, metal plates, all melted into soot and urban dust. The city's memory of her case dimmed accordingly, but not entirely. Every time a young reporter graduated from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, they heard the cautionary tale of a girl who chased truth and paid with her life. In 1994, cold case detective Leonard Dorsey reopened her file unofficially. A St. Louis native who remembered the headlines from childhood, he believed the case represented an unresolved era of corruption hidden beneath Midwestern civility. He interviewed aging print shop workers, tracked down retired editors, and requested chemical records of ink shipments from the late 1960s to the mid-70s. He found a curious overlap. Several specialized ink orders billed to different shell companies, all traced back to the same regional broker based in Indianapolis. That broker, in turn, had subcontracted through two firms dissolved shortly after Marla's death. Dorsey tried to subpoena their archived financials, but was denied, told the materials had been purged decades earlier in compliance with disposal standards. Dorsey's obsession pushed him deeper. He located Marla's notebooks through her family, stored in carefully wrapped stacks in their attic. Pages were neat, methodical, filled with underlined names: district controllers, aldermen, union stewards, warehouse landlords. He noticed one name repeated subtly, never fully visible, clipped by her own edits: R.H. Godfrey. This was not a politician or journalist, but a corporate attorney associated with several printing liquidation cases. Godfrey had represented newspapers during disputes over illegal fund transfers, always settling quietly, no trials, no testimony. When Dorsey attempted to reach him, he learned Godfrey had died in 1987, leaving no surviving professional records. The more Dorsey worked, the more friction he met. Archived police reports were missing pages. Ink analysis samples had degraded, their original lab signatures gone. Two potential witnesses he tracked down refused comment, one closing his door without speaking, another sending a letter weeks later explaining he would not risk revisiting that decade. The language suggested fear that had never faded. Still, Dorsey persisted. He uncovered something notable in the 1975 microfilm editions of the St. Louis Herald. 3 weeks before Marla's death, a quiet legal announcement was posted, a 1-inch column buried between obituary notices. It detailed the dissolution of a printing subsidiary tied to campaign advertising for state senators. The language was generic, but Dorsey connected it to Marla's draft notes. She had circled that announcement twice. Whatever she learned it fast, and within weeks she was dead. In 2001, DNA testing modernization prompted a departmental audit. Marla's case evidence was reviewed and resampled. Blood under her nails had been thought to belong entirely to her, but new testing revealed a mixed trace, too faint for profile but definitive. It came from a male source. Investigators also re-examined the wool fiber from her coat lining. Initially labeled as mass-produced fabric, 2001, microscopy determined it was not merely high quality but custom spun, the kind used rarely in American manufacturing, but common in limited bespoke winter lines sold in New York and Chicago. That detail strengthened theories that her killer was not a common laborer or random passerby, but a man occupying higher professional circles, likely connected to the printing and financial networks Marla had been tracing. Despite promising developments, no suspect emerged. Dorsey retired in 2006, leaving the case frustrated but more documented than it had been in 30 years. Before leaving, he recorded a final note: victim targeted for investigative pursuit, not personal interaction. Killer-controlled setting entirely. Crime presentation equal to editorial layout, intentional, communicative, composed. He believed the newspaper on her chest was not symbolism, but warning. Her final headline, the killer's editorial. Years passed again, and St. Louis transformed around her absence. The university expanded its journalism department. Digital news replaced morning print. Presses went silent. But in 2015, a graduate student working on a thesis about unsolved media-linked homicides contacted Marla's cousin and gained access to the attic notebooks. She scanned, cataloged, and cross-referenced them with declassified municipal documents. She found something overlooked by police and Dorsey both: a stamped routing code scribbled repeatedly in Marla's notes. It belonged not to a printing warehouse, but to a classified city distribution contract involving ballot printing. The timeline intensified. Marla wasn't just tracking embezzlement. She was connecting it to election material production. That finding reframed motive entirely. Her death occurred a year before a notoriously tight gubernatorial race, one plagued by allegations of improper ballot chain of custody. If she had uncovered financial ties linking ballot suppliers to fraudulent invoices, eliminating her would ensure silence before scandal landed in statewide headlines. In 2019, a remaining forensic sheet surfaced from university archives. Marla had checked out a book on press law, and inside it were 2 microsplices taped to the back cover, anonymous notes referencing preprint ballot sheets and off-site ink curring. Handwriting could not be confirmed as hers, but the style aligned with her meticulous annotations. Detectives considered that someone had fed her information anonymously, guiding her toward the scandal. If so, that informant vanished entirely once she died. Decades later, the case remains unsolved, but its weight never dissipated. St. Louis locals still refer to her as the reporter whose own headline became her obituary. The warehouse site, now paved into a parking structure, draws occasional visitors who whisper theories about hidden press runs, electoral fraud, and shredded ledgers. Each anniversary produces small online posts and quiet student articles trying to revive her truth. Marla Jennings exists today in the city's memory as more than a victim. She symbolizes the cost of investigation in a system where ink and influence blur. Her story endures not because of sensational imagery, but because every element — paper, headline, ledger, vote — points toward a single principle she died pursuing: truth published without permission. What remains is not resolution but a quiet ledger of unanswered questions. Not who killed her, though that matters deeply, but what secret was worth killing her for. Her final headline lied across her like closure, but instead it marked the beginning of a silence that the city still struggles to print beyond. By 2021, her case was circulated among independent investigators specializing in unsolved crimes tied to institutional secrecy. One of them, a former Chicago forensic accountant, identified a detail long buried in the microfilm stacks of the Missouri State Archive. A payroll cluster showing 3 journalists, including Marla, paid as string correspondents for a political reporting bureau that never officially existed. Two of those correspondents disappeared from public record, their bylines ceasing in late 1974. No birth certificates, no tax filings, no surviving employment testimonies. The bureau, on paper, dissolved quietly the same month Marla began her research into ballot printing. It gave her death a new contour, not just silencing, but erasure, a premeditated extraction from systems designed to track every citizen within bureaucracy. The audit of this hidden bureau sparked a renewed push from digital reporters, who began connecting the dots Marla had left behind. They traced the same Indianapolis ink broker to a silent parent corporation headquartered in Delaware, protected by layers of shell registration. Its surviving board members were elderly, unreachable, except one man who, when contacted, hung up the phone after only hearing her name. That reaction, subtle but unmistakable, affirmed what decades of suspicion suggested. Marla's murder had never been about personal violence, but about containing a political mechanism that crossed commerce, printing law, electoral process, and media compliance. Her notebooks were digitized in full in 2022. The scans revealed something that paper dust had hidden: indent pressure on pages previously considered blank. A forensic stylistics professor adjusted lighting spectra and uncovered faint pencil markings, dates, warehouse codes, and a final, unfinished line. If distribution shifts to secret route, proof will surface. The date beside it was November 3, 1975, the same day she died. That line, incomplete, implied she had intended to deliver her findings, not merely draft them. Perhaps she meant to meet someone that night, share evidence off campus, secure confirmation before publication. A special cold case board convened in early 2023. Detectives, archivists, forensic chemists, and election attorneys met in a closed room in Clayton, reviewing every microdetail. They requested funding for renewed DNA sequencing on the mixed trace beneath her nails, but degradation remained a formidable barrier. The wool fiber from the bespoke coat had no surviving tailors to trace, no catalog to match, only its existence as a calling card of a man with access, privilege, and invisibility. Still, the board pushed further. They questioned surviving families of original print operators. One daughter admitted her father had fled the profession abruptly after Marla's death, refusing to discuss presses, ink, or night shifts ever again. When she mentioned that the smell of ink made him physically ill, the board noted the psychological residue of complicity or proximity to violence. Not a single person tied to her investigation claimed innocence out loud, but none confessed guilt either. Silence, consistent across decades, became its own evidence. On the 50th anniversary of her murder, November 3, 2025, the St. Louis Herald published a commemorative front page. No sensationalism, no graphic memorial, only a blank square where a headline should be, bordered by her name, age, and the words, "Truth withheld is never truth undone." The editorial board refused interviews. Readers debated whether the gesture signaled guilt, respect, or calculated absolution. Families still visit what used to be Gratiot Street Warehouse, now a sterile parking complex beneath lead floodlights. They leave reporter notebooks, fountain pens, and worn-out press badges on the pavement corner where her body once lay with tomorrow's news covering her. Tourists don't stop there. Only locals who felt the chill of her headline do. Her parents are long buried beside her, but distant relatives still speak of her as the girl who tried to print what others destroyed. In 2027, a new forensic imaging tool reconstructed partial fingerprints on the staged newspaper. Though degraded, two shapes emerged, thumb and index impressions too large to belong to Marla. The match database offered no direct hit, but the ridge alignment suggested someone trained in handling ink surfaces, someone who knew how to grip newsprint without full transfer. That level of press familiarity eliminated casual suspects permanently. By 2030, her file remained one of the city's most examined but unresolved. The tragedy never spawned conspiracy fever, only sober acknowledgement that she died in pursuit of something most reporters abandon: proof beyond accusation. The ledger, the ballot sheets, the shell suppliers, the dissolved bureau, they formed a constellation of intent, the kind that kills without hesitation, then folds itself back into polite civic narrative. Marla Jennings' final hours will never be replayed with certainty, but their outline stands. A young woman stepped into night believing truth was a duty, not a gamble. Her killer stepped into the same night believing secrecy was a right, not a crime. Somewhere between those convictions lay an abandoned warehouse, a pre-printed headline, and a future she would never read. This case, like ink pressed onto cold metal plates, hardened before anyone could alter its shape. Yet, even without resolution, her legacy persists, not as caution but as indictment. She proved that corruption fears the written word more than any weapon. In St. Louis, her name remains a reminder that some truths surface only after every witness has died, every press has shut down, every editor has buried the lead. The city still waits for the day her headline is no longer her gravestone.